They survived betrayal. They survived distance. They survived the darkness that tried to tear them apart. But survival was never the same thing as peace. One final secret changes everything. And when love finally catches up, will it be enough? It all comes down to this. Be first at the table for the final conclusion to A Taste of Betrayal.
Space. Morning light seeped through Elise's curtains in soft gold stripes. Dust motes floated through the quiet, catching the glow. Elise blinked awake slowly, her body aching in ways she couldn't name. Fear, exhaustion, too many adrenaline crashes stacked together. Her dreams had been a hellish baptism, a gunshot that made her flinch, the closing in of metal walls that left her trembling in tears. Daesung's voice dripping venom on her skin, his chill touch promising horrors that made her body tense. Throughout the night, when she'd clawed herself awake, she felt Tae-hyun's strong arms wrapped around her. It wasn't an embrace, and it wasn't gentle. It was a shield, a lock, a desperate arrangement of limbs that formed a barricade against whatever ghosts he feared might follow her from her nightmares. Each time she woke, before she could even orient herself, she'd sensed his presence, heard the faint grind of his teeth, felt the way his hand hovered, but never quite rested, over her side, as though he was ready to snap awake at the smallest sign of danger. He was still beside her, fully dressed, sitting upright against the headboard, watching the open doorway like he expected someone to burst in at any moment. He hadn't slept, not even for a second. His phone sat in his lap, screen dark, but she saw the way his thumb twitched, compulsively, like he was scrolling through all the ways the world might go wrong. Elise wondered if he was waiting for the threat to return, or if he was watching to make sure she didn't slip away in the night, carried off by her own grisly dreams. She swallowed, her throat tight. Tae-hyun's attention snapped to her the moment her breath changed, his knuckles white where he gripped the phone. "Elise," he said, and in the hush of the apartment, his voice sounded louder than it was meant to. He leaned in, the cords in his neck tense, hair falling forward to shadow his brow. "Are you okay?" The question trembled between them, weighted with 100 unspoken terrors. His eyes swept her face, brisk in their inventory, as if searching for wounds he'd missed in the dimness of the night. His gaze lingered on the cut at her lip, the bruising blossoming at her collar, the delicate tenderness in the way she curled in on herself. There was a second, a heartbeat's hesitation, before he added, "Did he hurt you?" The pronoun landed with a hardness that made her flinch, as if. Daesung's hand was once again at her throat. "Not physically, if that's what you're worried about." She searched his eyes, noting that they were frighteningly calm, except for the thin fracture underneath, like he'd already buried what he'd done. "How are you so calm?" she asked, her hand reaching up to touch his face. "I know why you did it, I just didn't think you could." She felt him shift. His eyes became guarded as he watched her, as though she might suddenly sprout wings and take flight. "In my world, betrayal like that isn't ignored." He looked away for a second. "When he tried to poison me, most people expected me to deal with it immediately." His jaw tightened. "I didn't." He looked back at her. "Because he was my cousin." He paused. "When he came for you, that changed what was left. I could survive betrayal. I wasn't willing to gamble with your life." Elise felt a chill slide up her spine, leaving her exposed. The implied violence, the casual calculus of it, was at once alien and heartbreakingly human. She wanted to say something comforting, some thread of absolution for the man who had killed for her. But the words stuck, gummy and cold, in the back of her throat. Instead, she said, "Tae-hyun," and her voice was so soft that it barely reached him. He didn't move, but she could feel his attention snap back to her, the way a jaguar might pause mid-stride, a stillness so alert it was almost vibrating. "I need space," she whispered. The words felt absurd and selfish, a demand made after he'd split the world open to keep her safe. But she said them anyway, because they were true, and because if she didn't, she wasn't sure what would happen to her. Tae-hyun's expression was unchanged. He didn't argue, didn't plead. He simply nodded, like a man who'd already seen this moment play out 1,000 times. There was a silence then that was almost physical, like the oxygen had been sucked from the room and replaced with glass. "Space," he repeated, voice calm but cracking at the edges. "From me?" She nodded. He stared at the blanket for a long moment, his fingers unconsciously curling into the fabric, knuckles going white. "Elise," he said softer now, "I know you're scared. I know what happened was—" He had to stop to steady his breathing. "Was hell, but I'm here, I'm not leaving you." "That's the problem," she whispered. His eyes snapped to hers, hurt flashing fast before he masked it. Elise pushed herself up, hugging her knees to her chest, staring at the morning light instead of him. "I feel like I'm drowning," she said, voice trembling. "Everything happened so fast, too fast, the kidnapping, the gun, the secrets, your father, Dae-sung. I'm barely holding myself together." He opened his mouth. She lifted a hand again. "And then you were there," she added, voice breaking. "You saved me. Again, and I—" Her breath hitched. "I clung to you like you were the only thing keeping me alive." Tae-hyun's eyes softened with something like grief. "You don't have to carry this alone," he murmured. "Let me—" "I can't breathe," Elise whispered. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Not with all of this around me. Not with everything I'm feeling. Not with—" She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Elise," Tae-hyun said quietly, moving toward her instinctively. She flinched. He froze. She didn't mean to do it, God, she didn't, but her whole body recoiled, terrified on instinct alone. Not from him, from everything. A shadow crossed his face, pained and disbelieving. "Elise," his voice cracked. "I would never hurt you." "I know," she said quickly. "I know, but my body doesn't, my mind doesn't. Every loud noise, every shadow outside the window, every time I close my eyes, I keep seeing his face, his gun. I keep hearing the shot." He swallowed hard. "I need space," she whispered again. "Time to breathe. Time to remember who I am without fear." A long, aching silence stretched between them. Tae-hyun looked away, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. Every inch of him screamed protest, his posture, his breath, the way he forced his face into a mask that was cracking. Finally, he nodded. Slowly. Painfully. "I'll give you space," he said. His voice was hoarse. "But Elise, understand something." She looked at him. He held her gaze with devastating intensity. "I don't want space," he whispered. "Not from you." Her breath caught. "But I'll give you anything you need," he finished. "Anything." He stood, moving to the doorway. His hand hovered over the door frame, like he wasn't sure he'd be able to walk through it. "Elise," he said softly, without turning. She waited. I'm here, he whispered. Even if you can't stand to look at me right now, even if you need to be alone, I'm here. He finally stepped out, closing the door behind him with a soft, reluctant click. Elise's shoulders collapsed. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. And Tae-hyun? He stood on the other side of the door, forehead pressed against the wood, breathing like a man trying not to fall apart. Morning revelations. Elise lay in bed, curled on her side, arms wrapped tightly around her ribs as if holding herself together could stop the tears. Every breath shook. Every sob scraped raw against her throat. Asking Tae-hyun for space felt like ripping out a piece of herself, but being near him right now felt like trying to breathe through shattered glass. Her mind spiraled. Her body shook. And then the nausea hit. A sudden, violent wave that forced Elise upright. She pressed a palm to her stomach, breathing through the stabbing queasiness. Not again, she whispered, tears mixing with sweat on her cheeks. Her head fell back to the pillow, exhaustion anchoring her in place. She stayed like that for what felt like hours, eyes stinging, breath hitching, trapped between heartbreak and panic. A soft knock pulled her from the haze. Knock, knock, gentle but insistent. Elise? Came Sujin's muffled voice. Aga? Please open the door. Elise pressed her face into the pillow, willing herself to disappear. But the knock came again. Soft, patient, impossible to ignore. Finally, she forced herself out of bed. Her limbs felt heavy, each step an effort. She opened the door with trembling fingers. The instant she saw Sujin standing there, with sadness in her eyes, concern etched into every line of her gentle face, Elise's resolve crumbled. Tears surged again. Emo, Elise whispered before collapsing into her arms. Oh, my sweet girl, Sujin murmured, wrapping her tightly, rubbing soothing circles on her back. Come, let me in. Let me take care of you. Elise stepped aside, sniffing as Sujin slipped into the apartment with practiced calm. But then, another wave of nausea surged without warning, sinking claws into her stomach. Elise gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. Excuse me. She bolted for the bathroom. Sujin's expression tightened with recognition, but she said nothing. Elise retched until her body trembled with the effort. When she finally emerged pale and shaking, Sujin was in the kitchen, kettle steaming, her movements gentle and purposeful. Sit, she said softly. Elise obeyed, sinking onto the couch, clutching a pillow to her chest. Without a word, Sujin placed a steaming mug of ginger tea on the coffee table. Then she sat beside Elise with a soft rustle of her skirt, reached into her bag, and pulled out 2 pregnancy tests. Elise's breath left her body in a sharp exhale. Her eyes widened. Her fingers went numb. Her heartbeat stuttered painfully. No, she whispered. Sujin, I suspected, Aga, Sujin said gently. When we were held by Dae-sung, you were sick. But I didn't dare say anything. Not with him listening. Elise's vision blurred with panic. She held her stomach without realizing it. I brought these, Sujin said, placing the test carefully in Elise's hands. Not to frighten you, but because you need answers. And because you shouldn't face them alone. Her voice was soft, steady. Elise's throat tightened around a sob. Soo-jin squeezed her hand, then pressed the tea into her grasp. "This will help settle your stomach," the older woman said. Elise nodded shakily and forced herself to sip. The warmth soothed her throat, but not the tremor in her chest. With hands that barely obeyed her, she took the tests into the bathroom. Minutes later, she emerged, 2 sticks clutched in her fingers. 2 lines. On both. Positive. Her breath hitched. The room swayed. She sank onto the couch. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, Soo-jin. What am I going to do?" Soo-jin's heart twisted as she took Elise's trembling hands. "Aga, when will you tell Tae-hyun?" Elise flinched as if struck. "He deserves to know," Soo-jin continued mildly, though her eyes were firm. "This child is his, and he will fight the world for both of you." "I know," Elise said, tears spilling freely. "That's why I can't. Not yet. She pressed both hands to her face. "I just asked him for space. I can barely breathe. I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't give him this yet. It's too much." Soo-jin's expression softened, but concern creased her brow. "You cannot run from this forever." "I know," Elise whispered. "I just need a day, maybe 2. I need to think. I need to figure out who I am now before I bring him into this." Soo-jin's heart ached, but she nodded. 2 days, she said quietly. "No more." Elise exhaled shakily. "Thank you." Soo-jin stood, pressing a kiss to Elise's forehead. "Rest, dear, and gather your courage. You will need it." She slipped out the door. Elise sat perfectly still. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred. A baby. Fear. Tae-hyun. The kidnapping. Everything collapsing at once. And then something inside her cracked wide open. Before the panic could swallow her whole, she stumbled to her phone. Fingers shaking, she opened a travel app. Booked the next flight to Louisiana. Tonight. She threw clothes haphazardly into a bag, tears blurring her vision. She didn't leave a note. She didn't stop to breathe. She simply walked out the door, heart pounding, stomach churning, suitcase rattling behind her, fleeing the city, the danger, the truth, and the man she loved. Blindsided. Tae-hyun stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, staring out at the city as if it were a stranger. Seoul glittered beneath him. Neon and steel, sharp angles and soft haze. But tonight it felt like a battlefield made of ghosts. His father's voice, stern, cold, immovable, echoed in his mind. His uncle's face. Dae-sung's rage. Soo-jin's trembling confession. And the truth throbbed behind his ribs like an old wound split open. My father killed his own brother. My father destroyed their family to protect his empire. I've lived my life upholding a legacy built on blood. He pressed a hand to the glass, knuckles white. "I am not him," he whispered to the empty room. "I will not be him." The elevator chimed behind him. Park stepped out, his shoulders squared with the stiffness of a man carrying regret, like a stone in his chest. He didn't speak at first, just stood quietly, giving Tae-hyun a moment. Finally, "It's done," Park said. "Every loose end tied up. Dae-sung's men have been handled. The consortium has withdrawn its backing. No further threats. For now." Tae-hyun nodded once, jaw clenching. For now was never long enough. Park hesitated, then said in a low, steady voice, "Boss, Tae-hyun, I owe you an apology." Tae-hyun didn't turn. For what? For failing Elise. Silence stretched like a blade between them. Park's voice wavered for the first time in years. "She told me she didn't want protection. And I listened." His throat bobbed. "I should never have listened. I should have—" "You should have protected her," Tae-hyun finished quietly. Park closed his eyes. "Yes." Tae-hyun finally turned, and Park inhaled sharply at the exhaustion written into his features. Dark circles under his eyes, tension carved into every line of his body, grief tucked tightly behind his expression. But when Tae-hyun spoke, his voice was gentle. "You made a mistake," he said, "and you've made it right." Park's head snapped up. "You forgive me?" Tae-hyun let out a breath that trembled at the ends. "If I can't forgive the people I trust, then I become my father." Park swallowed hard. Tae-hyun looked away again, staring at the skyline as if searching for an answer somewhere between the city lights. "Everything I thought I understood," he murmured, "is crumbling. My father, what he did, what I inherited." His voice tightened. "I don't know what the future looks like anymore." Park stepped closer, standing at his side the way he had for over a decade. Silent support in the shape of a man. "Boss," he said carefully, "the future doesn't come from your father's sins. It comes from your choices." Tae-hyun let that settle. Park continued, even more gently. "And I need to ask you something. Not as your second in command, as your friend." Tae-hyun looked at him, wary. Park's eyes softened. "Do you love her?" The question felt like a blow. Tae-hyun's breath caught, his jaw locked, every muscle in his body tensed. He didn't speak, not because he didn't know the answer, but because speaking it aloud felt like stepping off a cliff. But he didn't have to say it. It was written all over him. Park nodded slowly, the truth settling between them. "I see," he said quietly. Tae-hyun braced both hands on the window ledge, shoulders shaking with the effort of holding himself together. He whispered, barely audible, "I can't lose her." Park exhaled deeply. "There's something else," he said, voice shifting. Grim. Serious. Tae-hyun straightened. "What?" Park swallowed. "The council. What about them? They know Dae-sung targeted Elise. A beat. They know she is important to you." Tae-hyun's heart slammed hard in his chest. Park hesitated, then delivered the blow. "The council won't accept her." Silence. Cold. Heavy. Final. Tae-hyun's fingers curled into fists, slow and deadly. Outside, the city lights flickered against the glass, and for the first time in his life, Tae-hyun Kang felt something stronger than fear, stronger than duty, the certainty that he was willing to tear down an empire for the woman he loved. The city stretched out below them, Seoul glittering beneath a pale morning sky. But Tae-hyun wasn't looking at it. He stood with his back to the window, hands braced on the conference table, breaths slow and controlled in a way that told Park the storm inside him had finally reached its breaking point. Park stood opposite him, uneasily straightening the cuffs of his jacket. "Boss, what are you thinking?" Tae-hyun closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them with a clarity Park had never seen before. "I'm stepping away from the syndicate." Park froze. For a full 3 seconds, he didn't breathe. "Tae-hyun," he whispered, "you can't mean—" "I mean every word," Tae-hyun said quietly. Park stared at him, stunned. "But the council, your father's seat, I don't care about the council, Tae-hyun cut in, or my father's seat, or the legacy he left behind. His voice was steady, too steady. The steadiness of a man who had already made peace with the consequences. I can't do this anymore, Tae-hyun continued, pacing away from the table. Not after what happened. Not after Elise. Not after my cousin. Not after learning what my father truly was. Park swallowed, throat dry. And the organization, our people, the alliances, you walking away leaves a power vacuum. No, Tae-hyun said sharply, turning to face him again. Not if someone I trust fills it. Park blinked. Tae-hyun stepped closer. You! The word hit Park like a blow. Me, he said hoarsely. Boss, Tae-hyun. I'm not. Yes, Tae-hyun insisted. You've been running half the operations for years. You know the structure, the alliances, the weak points, and you've never once betrayed me. Park shook his head slowly, disbelief in every line of his face. But the council wants stability, Tae-hyun said. They want someone predictable, someone disciplined, someone who won't start wars for personal vendettas. He paused. And someone who isn't in love with a woman they'd burn the world for. Park's expression softened painfully. Boss. Tae-hyun inhaled sharply. I can't protect Elise while I'm still running the syndicate, and I won't drag her deeper into this world. I won't become my father. He moved to the window again, the morning light outlining the tension in his shoulders. I'll keep my legitimate businesses, he said. The hotels, the tech holdings, the real estate. He paused. But everything else? The shadow operations, the council connections, the enforcement network? He turned back to Park with quiet finality. They're yours. Park's breath hitched. Tae-hyun, do you trust me with all of that? With my life, Tae-hyun said simply. And with hers. Park looked down, processing the enormity placed at his feet. When he finally looked up again, there was something different in his eyes. Loyalty sharpened into resolve. If this is truly what you want, Park said softly, then I'll do it. I'll take over. I'll keep the syndicate stable. I'll keep your people safe. And Elise? Tae-hyun asked, voice barely above a whisper. Park stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder, something he had never dared before. I'll watch over her with everything I have, Park promised. And I'll protect your future, whatever it looks like. Tae-hyun swallowed hard, emotion tightening his jaw. Thank you, he whispered. For a moment, silence settled between them. Heavy, emotional, final. Boss. Park hesitated before correcting himself. Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun looked up. You're choosing a different life, Park said quietly. That makes you more of a man than your father ever was. Tae-hyun's breath caught. Then Park exhaled slowly, his expression turning somber again. There's only one problem, he said. Tae-hyun stiffened. What? Park held his gaze, regret heavy in his eyes. I don't know where Elise is. Tae-hyun's blood ran cold. What do you mean? He whispered. Park hesitated. I came here to tell you. Soo-jin called. Elise left for the airport. Silence. Then, she's gone. The world stopped, and Tae-hyun felt the floor vanish beneath him. Tae-hyun was already moving toward the door when Soo-jin stepped out of the elevator. He nearly collided with her. Soo-jin Emo, where is she? He demanded, voice frayed with panic. Where did she go? The airport. Sujin's eyes shimmered with heartbreak. She lifted a hand, touching his arm to steady him. Not physically, but emotionally. "Aga," she whispered. "Wait." Tae-hyun jerked away as if burned. "I don't have time to wait. Tell me where she is." Sujin inhaled shakily. "She has gone back to Louisiana." The words hit him like a bullet. Tae-hyun swayed slightly, but caught himself on the wall, breath shuddering through him. "No," he whispered. "No, she wouldn't just leave. Not like this, not without—" He stopped. Memory flickered across his face. Elise's trembling confession that she needed space, the way she recoiled in fear, the tears she tried to hide. He had let her go. But not like this. Not without saying goodbye. Not without telling him where she was going. Not without— He closed his eyes. "She's scared," Sujin said softly. "More than she knows how to say." Tae-hyun's jaw clenched, pain flashing through him. "I should never have left her alone. I should have gone back. I should have." "Tae-hyun," Sujin cut in gently. "There is something you must know." He looked up, chest tight. Sujin stepped closer, placing both hands on his arms like a mother steadying a fractured child. "Elise didn't just leave because she was afraid," she said softly. Tae-hyun's breath stuttered. "Then why?" Sujin's eyes filled with tears, warm, aching, proud. "Because she is with child." Silence. A single, shattering silence. Tae-hyun blinked once. Twice. His breath stopped entirely. "What?" he whispered. Sujin's voice broke. "Elise. She's pregnant." The world tilted. He stumbled back a step, hand gripping the wall as if the floor had dropped away. His eyes burned, wide and disbelieving. "No," he breathed. "No, she would have told me. She would have—" His voice fractured. "She didn't tell me. Why didn't she tell me?" "She only learned this morning," Sujin said gently. "She was overwhelmed, frightened. She begged me not to tell you until she was ready." His hands curled slowly into fists. "She was afraid," Sujin whispered. "Afraid of what you'd think. Afraid she was dragging you back into the shadow of your father. Afraid of how your world might hurt her child." Her child. The words hollowed him out. A child. Their child. Tae-hyun sank onto the nearest chair without looking at it, elbows braced on his knees, fingers threaded into his hair. His breath came in shaky bursts, chest rising and falling too fast. "Why didn't she trust me?" he whispered. I would give anything." "She trusts you deeply," Sujin said softly. "That is why she left." He looked up, eyes swimming with anguish. "I don't understand." "You would have stopped her," Sujin said simply. "And she needed time. She needed air. She needed to believe she had a choice before she gave you everything." Tae-hyun pressed a hand to his mouth. "A child. Elise's child. His child." Love and terror and longing crashed together so violently he almost folded in on himself. Sujin stepped forward, cupping his cheek. "Tae-hyun," she whispered, "that baby will need both of you. But first, Elise needs to find her strength again." He closed his eyes, tears finally slipping down his face. When he spoke, his voice was ruined. "I have to go to her." Sujin nodded. "But not as the man who almost lost her," she said. "Go to her as the man who will never let her live in fear again." Tae-hyun's eyes opened, dark, steady, determined. He stood. "Tell Park to prepare the jet," he said. Sujin bowed her head, pride shining through her tears. "Yes, Aga." As she stepped back into the hall, Tae-hyun turned to the window, Seoul glowing large and lonely behind the glass. His voice was barely a whisper. "Elise, I'm coming." Epiphany. When Elise stepped off the plane, the first thing that struck her was the humid heat of the Gulf Coast city that instantly caused beads of perspiration to break out on her skin. The sleek vertical buildings and frenetic flow of neon colors that made Seoul glow with a relentless modern energy were replaced with weathered brick facades, wrought iron balconies draped in ferns, and streets that seemed to move to the rhythm of a distant trumpet. Instead of glass towers stretching toward the clouds, centuries-old buildings stood shoulder to shoulder, their faded colors carrying stories older than the nation itself. The air smelled different, too. In Seoul, the scent of roasted chestnuts, grilled meat, coffee, and exhaust had mingled together in a constant urban symphony. Here, the breeze carried notes of river water from the Mississippi, fried seafood, cayenne pepper, and sweet magnolia blossoms blooming somewhere beyond the crowded streets. The sounds felt foreign and familiar all at once. Gone were the clipped announcements of the subway, the hurried footsteps of office workers, and the constant hum of a city racing toward tomorrow. In their place came bursts of laughter from open doorways, jazz drifting from a corner bar, and the slow drawl of voices that stretched every syllable like there was nowhere urgent to be. Seoul had always felt like motion. New Orleans felt like memory. The Korean capital glittered with precision, every train arriving on time, every street illuminated, every building reaching higher than the last. New Orleans wore its imperfections proudly. Cracked sidewalks wound beneath ancient oak trees. Streetcars rattled down tracks that had carried generations. The city seemed less concerned with where it was going than with savoring where it had been. Elise paused outside the terminal and closed her eyes for a moment. Where Seoul was a city of ambition, speed, and reinvention, New Orleans was something entirely different. It didn't ask who she wanted to become. It reminded her of who she had always been. The humid air wrapped around her like an old friend's embrace, carrying echoes of crawfish boils, second-line parades, and family gatherings that stretched long past midnight. For the first time since leaving Louisiana, she felt the distance between her two worlds, the dazzling steel and neon skyline of Seoul, and the soulful, weathered heart of New Orleans. As she sat on the balcony of her hotel, overlooking Royal Street and the heart of the French Quarter, Elise sighed wistfully, admitting she'd missed her home city. In the past, she never would have been able to stay in such a coveted tourist spot. But now, it seemed fitting as she felt like she was on a grand tour of her past, seeking clarity before deciding what parts of her old life deserved a place in her future, and which memories needed to remain exactly where she had left them. Below her, Royal Street pulsed with life. A saxophone wailed somewhere in the distance while tourists drifted from shop to shop, their laughter rising above the steady clatter of carriage wheels on uneven pavement. The scent of pralines and rich Creole cooking floated upward on the warm evening breeze. Elise rested her forearms on the wrought iron railing and watched the city unfold beneath her. She had come home expecting comfort. Instead, New Orleans was forcing her to confront questions she had spent years avoiding. Questions about the choices she'd made, about the people she'd left behind, and about the man waiting for her on the other side of the world. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had traveled thousands of miles to escape the chaos of Seoul for a few weeks, only to discover that the noise she was trying to outrun wasn't in Korea at all. It was inside her. For years, Ambition had been her compass. Every decision had pointed toward becoming a better chef, earning respect, proving herself in a city where she had started with nothing. But somewhere along the way, her carefully ordered life had become entangled with Tae-hyun, and now every path she imagined seemed to circle back to him. The thought should have irritated her. Instead, it made her smile, a small, helpless smile she couldn't quite suppress. She leaned back in her chair and gazed at the fading sunset, painting the old buildings in shades of gold and amber. New Orleans had always been a city of ghosts, of history lingering in every courtyard and every brick-lined street. Perhaps that was why she had come, not to find answers, but to finally stop running from the questions. She spent the entire morning wandering through the familiar tourist charms of New Orleans, losing herself in the city's postcard-perfect beauty. She strolled along the Mississippi River, letting the humid breeze tangle her curls and carry away her thoughts. She leaned against the iron railing at Woldenberg Park and watched paddle-wheel steamboats drift across the muddy water, like ghosts from another century, their whistles echoing across the river. Street musicians filled the air with jazz, while artists displayed vibrant paintings beneath the shade of ancient oaks. At Café du Monde, she claimed a small table beneath the iconic green-striped awning and ordered her usual 3 beignets buried, beneath a mountain of powdered sugar and a cup of chicory coffee. The first bite tasted exactly as she remembered, warm, sweet, and comforting. For a moment, she could almost convince herself that she was 20 again, sitting in the same spot with her mother after a long day in the quarter. But memories were cruel things. The powdered sugar dissolved on her tongue, yet the ache in her chest remained. As the afternoon stretched on, the city's bright colors and cheerful sounds began to lose their ability to distract her. The laughter of tourists felt distant. The music faded into background noise. The worries she'd crossed an ocean to escape crept steadily back into her thoughts. But with it, she discovered that she'd let her rental car wander to one of her favorite places, her old job, Armstrong Cafe. If Kim's Halmione had opened the door to Korean cuisine, Mrs. Dolores Armstrong, owner of Armstrong's Cafe, had ushered Elise into the heart of Creole cooking. It was in her kitchen that Elise learned the difference between following a recipe and truly cooking, how to trust her senses, honor tradition, and pour love into every dish that left her hands. "Well, I'll be," Dolores Armstrong said as she made her way from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a cloth perched on her shoulder. "Elise Thibodeaux, or do my old eyes deceive me?" "No, ma'am, it's me, Mrs. Armstrong." Elise beamed as she gave the gray-haired, sturdy matron a warm hug. "What are you doing here? Are you visiting?" Mrs. Armstrong exclaimed. "I heard you were out there in Korea with Kim, making quite a name for yourself." "Yes, ma'am, that's correct." Mrs. Armstrong beckoned Elise to sit down at one of the rustic wooden tables. "Grady, fix Elise a heaping plate of that jambalaya and some sweet tea." The two women sat, and the older woman's piercing gaze seemed to measure and weigh the younger one, evaluating her with the same exacting standards she applied to every dish that left her kitchen. Elise decided to go on the offensive to initiate conversation in hopes of delaying the reading. Mrs. Armstrong was sure to extract sooner or later. "How has business been going?" Elise asked, surveying the cafe. "Business is going pretty good," Mrs. Armstrong answered. "Grady and I are a year away from retiring. Our daughter and her husband are going to take over the place. Maybe Grady and I will finally take that vacation we've been talking about for years now. Who knows? Maybe we'll come to see you and Kim in Korea." "That would be nice, Mrs. Armstrong." Kim would be thrilled to see the two of you touch down in his neck of the woods. "And how is Kim? I heard his restaurant is all the rage across the water." It is. Modu recently earned a Michelin star Gold Star rating. Is that so? Mrs. Armstrong beamed. Is he still popular with the ladies? Mrs. Armstrong's pointed question and arched eyebrow elicited a chuckle from Elise. Kim is still Kim, but he's never been more laser-focused on his restaurant. What about you? Mrs. Armstrong pressed gently. Have you met someone special? Elise's blush seemed to provide the older woman with the answer to her question. You love him, she said matter-of-factly. How do you know? Baby, I'm 72 years old, been married for 52 years, raised children, and spent years watching people fall in and out of love over plates of étouffée. You think I can't recognize that look? What look? The one that says somebody halfway around the world has your heart. The wings of truth fluttered in Elise's heart under Mrs. Armstrong's intent gaze. Tilting her head, she met her mentor's eyes with a probing question of her own. How did you know that what you and Mr. Armstrong had would last? I suppose no one really knows, the older woman mused. I've seen some relationships that everyone thought would last forever end. I've seen others that seemed to be rocky stand the test of time. The real question is whether you're willing to take the risk and find out. That's just it, Mrs. Armstrong. You remember what happened the last time I took a risk. Not as sharply as they once had, but enough. Enough that she could still feel the scar. Enough that part of her still expected loss whenever happiness lingered too long. She released a shaky breath. I built my whole future around him. Her gaze drifted toward the restaurant window, toward the city beyond. Then one day I woke up and everything I'd planned was gone. Mrs. Armstrong remained silent, listening. I don't know if I can survive that again. The confession hung heavily between them. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the restaurant kitchen. Then Mrs. Armstrong leaned forward. Baby. Elise looked up. The older woman's eyes were kind, but firm. The truth is, you survived it already. The words struck her squarely in the chest. What? You keep talking like heartbreak is something waiting for you in the future. Mrs. Armstrong pointed at her. But you've already lived through it. Elise opened her mouth, then closed it. That man broke your heart. The older woman shrugged. And yet, here you are. Elise swallowed. You got up. Mrs. Armstrong ticked points off on her fingers. You moved across the world. Another finger. You built a career. Another. You became a chef. Another. You helped earn a Michelin star. The older woman's eyes narrowed. So don't sit here acting like you're fragile. The statement landed harder than any comfort could have, because it wasn't comfort. It was truth. Mrs. Armstrong reached across the table and patted her hand. You are many things, Elise Thibodeaux. A faint smile touched her lips. But fragile ain't one of them. Elise laughed softly through the sting in her eyes. The older woman smiled. Now. Her tone shifted. Tell me about this man. Elise groaned. Mrs. Armstrong. No, seriously. A mischievous glint appeared in her eyes. I need details. There are no details. That's a lie. It is. Mrs. Armstrong nodded. Thought so. Elise laughed despite herself. The older woman settled back in her chair. What is it about him? The question lingered. Elise opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. Because the answer wasn't simple, because Tae-hyun wasn't simple. Finally, she said quietly, He makes me feel safe. Mrs. Armstrong's expression changed. The teasing disappeared. completely. Safe? Elise nodded, which sounds ridiculous. Why? A small laugh escaped her. Because if you met him, he would probably be the last person on earth you'd describe that way. Mrs. Armstrong's eyebrows rose. That bad? Worse. The older woman stared. Elise laughed. I'm serious. Lord. But with me, Elise's smile softened. He's different. Mrs. Armstrong watched her carefully. How? Elise thought about it, about the man everyone feared. The man who could command a room with a glance. The man who carried darkness like a second skin. Then she thought about the way he tucked a blanket around her when he thought she was asleep. The way he remembered her favorite coffee. The way he looked at her as if she were something precious. He sees me. The answer came quietly. But really sees me. Mrs. Armstrong nodded slowly. That's rare. Elise swallowed. He makes me want things I stopped wanting. The older woman smiled. Like what? A tear escaped before Elise could stop it. A family. The admission trembled in the air. Mrs. Armstrong's face softened completely. Oh, baby. Elise laughed shakily. I know. No. The older woman squeezed her hand. That's not something to be ashamed of. Elise blinked, because maybe part of her had been ashamed, not of wanting a family, but of wanting one badly enough to risk being hurt again. Mrs. Armstrong smiled. Listen to me. Elise met her gaze. Love isn't a guarantee. The older woman's voice was gentle. It never has been. She glanced toward the kitchen, toward the life she'd built. The day I married my husband, neither one of us knew we'd get 52 years. A wistful smile crossed her face. We got lucky. Then she looked back at Elise. But if I'd spent my whole life protecting myself from loss, I'd have missed every beautiful thing that came before it. The words settled into Elise's heart, deeply, permanently. Mrs. Armstrong squeezed her hand one last time. So the question isn't whether this man can hurt you. Elise's breath caught. The question is whether loving him is worth the risk. The answer came immediately, instantly, without hesitation, without fear, or without doubt. Yes. The realization startled her, because it was so clear. Mrs. Armstrong saw it happen, saw the answer bloom across Elise's face. A knowing smile spread across the older woman's lips. There it is. Elise blinked. What? Mrs. Armstrong chuckled. The look. And for the first time, Elise understood exactly what she meant. By the time the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Elise's footsteps were considerably lighter. The conversation with Mrs. Armstrong lingered in her thoughts as she drove through the city. Not because the older woman had given her answers. She hadn't. Mrs. Armstrong had simply reminded her of something Elise had forgotten. Fear wasn't wisdom, and avoiding risk wasn't the same thing as protecting herself. The city gradually gave way to quiet. Rows of above-ground tombs rose from the earth like a city of white stone, their surfaces weathered by generations of Louisiana heat, storms, and sorrow. The evening air was still, carrying only the distant rustle of magnolia leaves and the faint song of cicadas awakening for the night. Elise followed the familiar winding path until she reached the family crypt. For a moment, she simply stood there. The name etched into the marble no longer stole the breath from her lungs the way it once had. The ache remained. It always would. But grief had softened over the years. transforming from an open wound into something quieter, something she carried rather than something that carried her. She brushed away a few leaves that had gathered at the base of the crypt before lowering herself onto the stone bench nearby. "Hey, Mama." A smile touched her lips. "I know." She shook her head. "It's been too long." The evening breeze stirred gently around her. For the first time since arriving in New Orleans, she didn't feel overwhelmed by what she needed to say. Instead, it felt like catching up with someone she'd missed. So much has happened. Her eyes drifted toward the fading sky. "You remember how I used to talk about leaving Louisiana someday?" A soft laugh escaped her. "Well, I did it," she smiled. "I moved to South Korea." Even now, the sentence sounded surreal. "I started over completely." Her gaze returned to the crypt. "And somehow, Mama, I became a chef." Emotion tightened her throat. "A real one." She laughed softly. "The restaurant earned a Michelin star." The words hung in the air. This time she allowed herself to feel the pride, not because the achievement mattered, because she knew her mother would have been proud. The thought warmed her chest. "I wish you could have seen it." Her eyes glistened. "You would have bragged to everybody." The image made her smile wider. "You would have told complete strangers." The breeze seemed to answer her, and somehow she could almost hear her mother's voice. "You're damn right I would have." Elise laughed. Then her hand drifted to her stomach. Immediately her smile softened. "Oh." The word escaped her quietly. "I almost forgot the biggest news." Her fingers spread protectively across her abdomen. "You're going to be a grandmother." The words settled into the evening air. This time, there was no fear attached to them, only wonder. A disbelieving smile. A little awe. "I still can't believe it myself." She could practically imagine her mother's reaction. The dramatic gasp, the tears, the immediate planning, the complete inability to keep the secret. Her smile widened. "You would have loved that." For several moments she sat quietly, rubbing gentle circles over her stomach. The future suddenly felt very close, very real. Then her expression grew thoughtful. "And there's someone else I need to tell you about." The words came easier than she'd expected. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Tae-hyun. Just speaking his name made her smile. A genuine one. The kind she could never quite hide. The kind Mrs. Armstrong had noticed immediately. A soft laugh escaped her. "Apparently everyone knows I love him except me." Her eyes dropped briefly. Then she shook her head. "No." A smile tugged at her lips. "That's not true either." She had known. For a long time. She'd simply been afraid of what it meant. Afraid of trusting her heart again. Afraid of losing something she couldn't bear to lose. But fear wasn't the same thing as truth. And she was finally tired of letting fear make decisions for her. Elise looked at the crypt. "Mama, if you met him, you'd probably have a lot of questions." A pause. "Actually, you definitely have a lot of questions." She laughed. "And probably several concerns." Several was putting it mildly. Her mother would have had opinions. Many opinions. Yet when she thought about Tae-hyun, the fear that had followed her for months felt distant now. What remained was clarity. not certainty. No one got certainty. Mrs. Armstrong was right about that. There were no guarantees, no promises, no way to know how a story would end. Only the choice to live it, the choice to love, the choice to trust. I don't know what happens next. Her voice was soft, honest. But I know what I want. The words felt solid, steady. I want him. The confession carried none of the panic it once would have, only peace. I want our family. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. Not tears of grief, not tears of fear, something gentler, something hopeful. I want the life we're building together. The breeze moved through the cemetery again, stirring the magnolia branches overhead. For the first time in months, Elise felt completely still inside. The questions hadn't disappeared. Life was still complicated. The future remained unwritten. But her heart knew its direction. And that was enough. She rose from the bench and brushed her palms against her jeans. The sun had nearly disappeared beyond the horizon. Before leaving, she rested her fingers lightly against the marble. "I miss you?" Her voice trembled. "I always will." A tear slid down her cheek. Then she smiled. "But I think I'm okay now." The words surprised her. Because they were true. Not healed. Not finished grieving. Not perfect. Simply okay. And after everything, that felt like a miracle. "I love you, Mama." The evening air wrapped around her like an embrace. Elise pressed a kiss to her fingertips and touched the stone one last time. Then she turned toward the path leading back to her car. Toward Seoul. Toward Tae-hyun. Toward the family waiting for her. Toward the future. And for the first time since she'd come home, she walked toward it without looking back. Confessions. By the time Elise returned to her hotel, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. The emotional whirlwind of the day, the city, the memories, her mother's grave, the truths she'd finally allowed herself to admit, had left her feeling wrung out. But for the first time in weeks, she felt steady, focused. The constant noise in her head had quieted. She showered, letting the hot water wash away the cemetery dust and the lingering scent of magnolia and river air. When she finally climbed into bed, the city lights of the French Quarter glowed faintly through the curtains. Her hand drifted instinctively to her stomach. A smile softened her features. "Well," she whispered into the darkness, "I think we found the clarity we came looking for." The words felt strange, wonderful, terrifying. She rubbed gentle circles over her abdomen. "And I think we'd better get back to Seoul." Her smile widened. "We have to tell your daddy, little one." Emotion tightened her throat. She still couldn't quite believe it herself. Tae-hyun. A father. The image was so absurd and so perfect that she laughed softly. "You're going to shock him." The baby naturally offered no opinion. Elise closed her eyes. For the first time since leaving Korea, sleep came easily. A soft, insistent knocking pulled Elise from sleep. Knock. Knock. Pause. Knock. She groaned, pushing herself upright. She looked at the clock and saw that it was late, 12:30 a.m. to be exact. She wasn't expecting anyone. No room service, no housekeeping. No one knew she was here. Her heart kicked in her chest. Elise. She froze. Her breath left her lungs in one violent rush. That voice, deep, low, worn, raw at the edges. Tae-hyun, she whispered, barely audible. The knocking came again, firmer this time. Elise, please, open the door. Her legs trembled as she slid from the bed. She crossed the room in a daze, fingers shaking around the handle. For a second, she almost couldn't make herself turn it. Then she opened the door. And there he was. Tae-hyun stood in the hallway, chest heaving like he'd run the whole way from Seoul, hair mussed from travel, suit wrinkled and dusted from a long flight. His eyes, red-rimmed, hollow, desperate, met hers with a force that nearly knocked her off her feet. "Elise," he breathed, voice breaking with relief. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Tae-hyun, what, how?" He didn't let her finish. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him with a soft, shaking exhale. "I thought I lost you," he said, the words falling out of him like a confession he'd been holding back for years, not hours. Elise's breath hitched. Tae-hyun, I told you I needed space." "Yes," he said, stepping closer. "And you can have it. I'll give you time, distance, anything. But not like this." His voice cracked. "Not without knowing if you're safe, not without hearing your voice, not without—" He stopped, dragging a hand through his hair. "Not without seeing you." Elise swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. "I didn't expect you to come here. I didn't expect you to leave me," he whispered. The words hit her like a blow. Tae-hyun looked down briefly, jaw trembling. "I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Not after Sujin told me you were gone. Not after everything we've been through. Elise, He broke off, pressing a fist to his chest. "I thought you were choosing a life without me." Elise's eyes welled. "Tae-hyun, I know I hurt you," he said, stepping closer. "And I know my world almost destroyed you. And I would never blame you for walking away from that." His voice softened to a whisper. "But don't walk away from me." Her breath stuttered. He reached out, but stopped short, hand hovering just shy of her cheek. "Please tell me I haven't lost you." "Tae-hyun," she said, tears spilling over. "You didn't lose me. I needed—" "Space," he finished, voice trembling. "I know." She nodded. He bowed his head, trying to steady himself. "I'll give you all the space you need," he whispered. "I just needed to see you, to let you know how I feel." She inhaled shakily, overwhelmed. "You came all the way to Louisiana," she whispered. His eyes shone with something deep and aching. "I would have gone to the ends of the earth." A sob escaped her. "And Elise," his voice softened further, raw with vulnerability. "You should know something. If you decide you can't forgive me, if you decide you don't want a future with me, I'll support whatever you need. If you want me gone, I'll give you space, but not absence. Not from our child, not from your life, if you ever need me." Her heart clenched painfully. "But I have to tell you this first." He lifted his gaze to meet hers. "I love you." Her knees nearly gave way. "I love you," he repeated, voice breaking. "I think I have for longer than I can admit. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that I'm not the man you were running from. I'll be whatever you need, Elise. Just don't shut me out." Elise's breath trembled. "Tae-hyun," she whispered, tears streaming now. I wasn't running from you. He froze. She wiped her cheeks. I was running from myself, from my fear, from everything that happened. I felt like I couldn't breathe. He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. And now? He asked. She looked up at him, voice trembling. Now, I don't want to run anymore. I love you too. His eyes flooded with emotion so intense, it softened every sharp edge of his face. Elise, he whispered. Tae-hyun, she breathed back. He cupped her cheek with reverent care as if afraid she'd vanish. She leaned into his touch, leaned into his kiss. And for the first time since the nightmare began, she felt something inside her settle. Not perfectly, not fully, but enough. Enough to let him in again. Proposal. It happened on a gentle spring evening, the kind that seemed to wash the city in the promise of new beginnings. It was a night that smelled of hope and rain, and the faint, briny memory of the sea. Several weeks had passed since Elise returned to Seoul, weeks of learning to walk again, weeks of relearning the sound of her own laughter, weeks of waking from nightmares only to discover she was no longer alone. Each morning, she opened her eyes to sunlight and Tae-hyun, and each morning felt less miraculous and more ordinary. And that, she thought, was the real miracle. Every day carried its own small healing. There were difficult apologies, and even more difficult forgivenesses, traded over morning coffee or whispered into the hush before sleep. Their lives were no longer the frantic, high-stakes negotiation of trauma and desire. They were the slow accretion of trust, the gentle labor of making two entirely incompatible futures align. They went to the market together. They learned the names of every fruit in 2 languages. They fought about dish soap brands and then made up over tangerines. They built silently and stubbornly, something stronger than passion, a life. The apartment felt different now. Elise noticed it in the quality of the light, the way it lingered in corners and made the space look warmer, lived in. The place felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The echoing emptiness of Tae-hyun's penthouse had once seemed intimidating, a blank canvas for acts of cruelty or loneliness. Now it held the muffled, comforting clutter of 2 people learning to cohabitate. His shoes by the door, her books colonizing every available surface, their toothbrushes standing side by side like unlikely allies. Tonight, Elise stood barefoot in the kitchen, one hand absently stroking the soft curve of her belly, the other stirring a pot of soup that simmered with the scents of rosemary, garlic, and ginger. Every so often, she paused to sniff the air as if she half expected some alchemical transformation. Cooking was still her passion, but she'd had to take a break from Modu and off her feet so much as her belly swelled. She was still adjusting to the idea of twins, twin boys. The memory of the doctor's voice, matter of fact, made her smile faintly. She'd stared at the grainy ultrasound in disbelief, then looked at Tae-hyun, the irony not lost on him. It was the first time she'd seen Tae-hyun break, but she knew his tears were for the cousin he lost in the fateful second chance he'd been given. Some days, the idea that she could incubate 2 entire human beings left her awestruck. Other days, she felt like a science project gone awry. But each time she remembered, the corners of her mouth lifted in a smile. Their babies. Plural. Like a punchline she never saw coming. Behind her, Tae-hyun was hunched over the counter, precisely dicing carrots with a focus usually reserved for assassination contracts. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, exposing muscled forearms that glistened faintly with the effort of culinary labor. His hair, usually immaculate, had fallen over his brow, and every so often he raised a hand to brush it back, leaving a streak of carrot on his temple. The sight of him, this former warlord, this man who once terrified half the city, utterly absorbed in the geometry of vegetables, never failed to amuse her. She watched him for a moment, the concentration in his jaw, the deftness in his hands, and wondered how many lives he had saved simply by choosing to love her instead of destroy her. This was the paradox at the heart of their relationship, that she felt safest with the most dangerous man in Seoul. It was only when he stopped chopping and stood motionless, hands at his sides, that she sensed something shift. The kitchen was suddenly too quiet, as if the very air was waiting. "Elise," he said. His voice was different, soft and unsteady, as if he'd lost the script of his own life. She turned, expecting to see a severed thumb or a dropped carrot. Instead, she saw Tae-hyun standing several feet away, eyes locked on hers, face stripped of all its usual confidence. "Tae-hyun," she said, confused. He swallowed once. Then, to her utter astonishment, he dropped to one knee. Her hand flew to her mouth. For a moment, she thought he was joking or having a stroke. But then she saw the trembling in his fingers as he produced a tiny black velvet box, and she understood. This was real. He cleared his throat twice. His eyes never left hers. "I had a speech," he said. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a tiny, choked sound. "You had a speech," she repeated, dazed. "A very good one." He scowled at the memory. "Park helped me write it." She groaned even as tears started to sting her eyes. "Oh, God." "Exactly," he said, and for the first time in her life, she saw him look genuinely embarrassed. He opened the box. Nestled inside was a diamond, princess cut, elegant and simple, the kind of ring that would look just as beautiful in a museum as on a finger. It was not huge, not ostentatious, but it caught the kitchen light and fractured it into 100 glimmering constellations. For a moment, Elise just stared, her mind gone entirely blank. Then, Tae-hyun's voice found its footing. It was quieter now, and steadier, as if he'd surrendered to the gravity of the moment. "I know you," he said. "You love beautiful things. The perfect meal, the perfect sunset." He glanced at the window where the city's lights flickered like scattered gems. "You deserve beautiful things too." Tears spilled over, hot and unfamiliar. Elise wiped them away with the back of her wrist, but they kept coming, stubborn as rain. "When I met you," he continued, "I thought I knew exactly who I was. But our children," he looked at her belly, voice breaking just a little, "they proved otherwise." He took a breath that sounded like it hurt. "You showed me that strength isn't fear, it's trust. You taught me that protecting someone isn't the same as controlling them, and that love isn't a weakness." The faintest smile touched his mouth. "It's the strongest thing I've ever felt." She was crying in earnest now, but it didn't matter, because he was too. He held out the box. "Elise Thibodeaux," he said, voice rich with certainty and longing. "Will you marry me?" The world stopped. The vegetables, the soup, the city beyond the window, all of it faded into nothing. There was only this man, this question, this moment. She nodded, voice torn raw with emotion. "Yes," she said. He exhaled, as if he'd just surfaced from deep water. "Yes." "Yes, Tae-hyun," she laughed, and the sound rang with every heartbreak and healing that had brought them to this point. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger with a reverence that made her shiver. It was a perfect fit. Of course it was. He'd measured her fingers in her sleep months ago, when he thought she wouldn't notice. The moment the ring settled into place, he stood and pulled her into his arms. He held her as if she was both fragile and indestructible, as if she alone tethered him to the earth. For a long time, neither of them spoke, content to stand in the glow of the kitchen and the astonishing, irreversible fact of their happiness. Finally, Tae-hyun pressed his face into her hair. "We should get married next month," he murmured. Elise laughed, the sound muffled against his shoulder. "What?" "Next month," he said more insistently. She turned to look at him. "We can't plan a wedding in 4 weeks." "6 then," he countered, and when she shook her head, the look of disappointment was almost comical. "Tae-hyun," she said, "I am pregnant with twins." She spread her hands as though demonstrating the scale of the problem. He nodded, as if this confirmed his argument. "Exactly. We should do it before they arrive." She rolled her eyes. "I am not squeezing myself into a wedding dress while I look like a parade float." He frowned. "We can have one made," he offered. "Tae-hyun." "A larger one?" She laughed, but there was a tenderness beneath it, like he had peeled away her defenses one by one and found only affection at the center. "I want to marry you, too," she admitted. He smiled. A real one, unguarded and a little goofy. "Then let's." She hesitated, an idea taking shape. "What if we do both?" He blinked. "Both?" "We get married now," she explained. "Just us, a civil ceremony. Small, and then after the twins, we do the big wedding. With everyone." She saw the hope flare in him, bright and childlike. Future wife. Better. Much better. Epilogue. Kim's dressing room at the back of the restaurant smelled faintly of cedar, starch, and the clean bite of expensive cologne. Afternoon light slanted through the half-drawn blinds, striping the floor in gold. Jackets hung neatly from hooks. A pair of polished black shoes waited by the chair. On the small table by the mirror sat a squat bottle of top-shelf bourbon. Kim had clearly been saving for an occasion worthy of it. Tae-hyun stood in front of the mirror in a black tuxedo so impeccably tailored it looked poured onto him. Park at his shoulder, adjusting a cufflink with his usual severe concentration. Kim loosened the stopper on the bourbon and poured 3 fingers into heavy crystal glasses. "Seeing as you're already married with 2 kids," Kim said, handing one over with a grin, "I figured you wouldn't be nervous about today. But I thought you might still like a drink just to take the edge off." Tae-hyun accepted the glass and looked down into the amber liquor for a beat before a quiet smile touched his mouth. "You're right," he said. "I'm not nervous about today at all." His gaze lifted to the mirror again, but what he saw there was somewhere far beyond his own reflection. "I get to celebrate my wife and kids. Something I never thought I'd have." His voice lowered. "Something I don't deserve." Kim's expression softened. He leaned back against the vanity, glass in hand. "None of us deserve it, man," he said solemnly. "But we hope for it anyway." Park, standing straighter than ever in his dark suit, gave a small nod and lifted his glass. "And if we are lucky," he said in his clipped, measured way, "we spend the rest of our lives proving worthy of it." For a moment, the room went quiet around that. Then Kim raised his glass higher. "To luck, then, and to the people who make us believe in it." They touched crystal lightly and drank. The bourbon burned clean and warm all the way down. Tae-hyun set his empty glass on the table and exhaled slowly, as if letting out years of tension with it. Kim clapped him once on the shoulder, his smile returning. "All right," he said. "Let's get you married. Again." Behind the restaurant, the garden had been transformed. White roses climbed trellises laced with ivy. Soft blush peonies overflowed from stone planters. Strings of tiny lights swayed overhead like captured stars, though the late afternoon sun still held the day in its golden palm. The aisle was lined with petals, and beyond the floral arch, the city hummed at a respectful distance, as if even Seoul knew to keep quiet for this. Guests filled the rows in a warm blur of familiar faces. Modu's staff sat beaming and tearful. Park took his place near the front, composed but visibly proud. Soo-jin sat in the first row, radiant in silk hanbok, cradling one baby boy against her shoulder while his twin, all curls and solemn eyes, sat on the lap of Modu's recently hired sous chef, cooing in his tiny white suit. Tae-hyun stood beneath the arch and folded his hands in front of him to hide the slightest tremor. He had faced armed men, ruthless councils, and blood-bound betrayal without flinching. But this small walk between one life and another, undid him in ways violence never could. The music changed. Everyone rose. And then Elise appeared. The sun kissed her skin and turned her into something almost otherworldly. She floated rather than walked, one hand lightly gathering the skirt of her gown as she came down the aisle. The dress was exquisite, an A-line bridal gown with a dreamy, romantic softness to it, the off-the-shoulder neckline exposing the elegant line of her collarbones and shoulders. The bodice fit her delicately before flowing into layers that moved around her, like light and sea foam, half fairy tale, half old-world grace. The lace and gauze caught the breeze and the sun, and every step she took seemed touched by gold. She was not just beautiful, she was luminous. Her eyes found his before she'd even reached the halfway point. And when they did, the world dropped away. Tae-hyun felt the tear before he registered it. It slid warm and unhidden down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away, because all at once he was seeing everything. The poisoned dish, the penthouse kitchen, her leaving, the fear of losing her before he had truly had her, the weight of his father's sins, the night she told him she wanted him to live, watching the birth of his sons, their twin sons' laughter, the impossible, ordinary mornings he'd once believed belonged only to other people. And now this, Elise, walking toward him in sunlight, choosing him again. When she finally reached him, her bouquet trembling ever so slightly in her hands, Tae-hyun let out a breath that sounded halfway between a laugh and a prayer. "You're crying," Elise whispered, her own smile trembling. "So are you," he said. She laughed softly through the sheen in her eyes, and he reached for her hands as though there had never been a time he was not meant to hold them. The officiant began speaking, but Tae-hyun barely heard the first few words. He was too busy looking at his wife as if he were still incapable of believing she was real. Their son made a tiny, impatient noise from Soo-jin's lap, drawing a ripple of laughter through the guests. The baby stirred against Soo-jin's shoulder, then settled again. Elise glanced over, smiling with such open love that Tae-hyun thought his heart might split from the force of it. When it came time for vows, they spoke simply. No grand speeches, no performance, just truth. Elise's voice shook when she promised, "I choose you in peace, not just in chaos. In ordinary days, not just impossible ones. I choose the man you fought to become." Tae-hyun's throat worked before he found his own. "I spent most of my life believing love was a weakness," he said, his voice low but clear. You taught me it is the only reason to become better. I choose you, Elise. In every life I am lucky enough to have, I will choose you. By the time he slipped the ring onto her finger, half the garden was openly crying, Kim included. You may kiss your bride, the officiant said. Tae-hyun didn't rush. He stepped closer, one hand settling at Elise's waist, the other cupping her face with a tenderness that still felt miraculous. And when he kissed her, it was slow and reverent and full of everything they had survived to get here. Applause broke around them. Laughter. Tears. The sharp, startled cry of one of their sons, whose sleep was interrupted by the claps. When they turned back to their guests, husband and wife still, the garden felt suspended in the kind of joy people spend whole lives chasing. Kim whooped loudest. Park actually smiled. Soo-jin beamed so brightly she looked years younger, gently bouncing the baby, as if he too understood he was witnessing a blessing. As Tae-hyun drew Elise close and looked out at the family they had made from broken things and second chances, he understood something with breathtaking clarity. This, not power, not fear, not legacy, was the life he had been meant to fight for all along. Epilogue 2. The Louisiana Jazz Ensemble. Tae-hyun had flown in from Louisiana and was earning the pretty penny he'd paid for them. Kim grinned to himself as he thought of how infectious the Bayou City was on even his typically serious friend after spending only a few days there. The syncopated rhythms had a similar effect on the wedding guests, who were spread out around the garden, dancing in clusters. Kim had even gotten Soo-jin to take a spin dancing at the garden reception. She reminded him of his Halmione, the one woman who'd ever loved him unconditionally, the only one who'd never left him and taken his heart with them, at least not willingly. Unfortunately, even death had pulled her away from him in the end. He shook his head to clear his head of such dangerously poignant thoughts. It had been the perfect day for an outdoor wedding, with clear blue skies that now gave way to blends of burnt orange, gold, and purple as the day transitioned into sunset. The lanterns and fairy lights now illuminated the garden with a sheen that gave it an ethereal beauty, like a secret paradise nestled within the muted cityscape. Kim sighed to himself as he finally let his shoulders drop, and the smile he'd worn all day settled into a more sober curve of his full lips. Watching Elise and Tae-hyun exchange vows affected him more than he'd expected. If anyone deserved true love and all the happiness life had to offer, it was his closest friend. He hardly recognized the woman who, nearly a year ago, had come to Modu looking worn and subdued. A stranger would never know she'd survived loss, betrayal, heartache, and even kidnapping. Tae-hyun's words from earlier echoed in his head now. I get to celebrate my wife and kids, something I never thought I'd have. He wondered if love was in the cards for someone like him. He always seemed to be too busy with too much responsibility to be worried about love. He'd had a few situationships, but women didn't enjoy playing the side piece to the main attraction in his life Modu. You look like someone who doesn't trust happy endings. Kim had been so buried in his thoughts that he hadn't heard anyone approach. Do I? He said, leveling his gaze at the petite young woman standing next to him. For a moment, Kim forgot what she'd said. There was no other word for it, Kim thought, watching her from his slight vantage. She was beautiful, but not in the theatrical, high-gloss way that often passed for beauty in his world. She didn't wield her looks like a weapon, didn't seem aware of or interested in the way her mere presence bent the air around her. No, her beauty was quieter, as if she wore it for herself alone. And if anyone else noticed, well, that was their business. It struck Kim as a rare and deeply disarming thing. It was a beauty measured in increments, the kind that required patience, a second glance, a moment of careful attention. The type that, once discovered, made you suddenly aware of how shallow most other beauties were by comparison. In the warm dusk, her hair, raven dark, hung in loose, clean waves that curved just past her shoulders. The shifting lantern light caught in its strands as she turned, sparking subtle flecks of gold, softening the contour of her jaw, and drawing the eye to the elegant line of her neck. A few strands had drifted free in the humidity, curling against her cheeks and temples, framing a face with delicate, well-balanced features. Her jaw was gently squared, her lips unpainted but naturally full, and her nose was fine, the bridge straight as a brushstroke. If Kim looked past the ornamentation, the faint shimmer at her collarbones, the line of pearl buttons at her wrist, he could focus on the skin itself like fine porcelain, luminous and unblemished save for a faint scar at her temple, nearly invisible against the paleness. She wore a dress that could have been plucked from a Paris showroom or a Gangnam boutique, but on her it looked effortless, unassuming, a slip of sage silk that skimmed her figure in a way that suggested she'd chosen it more for comfort than spectacle. For a few moments, Kim let himself indulge in the details, cataloging each one as if it would reveal her essence. The way she stood, not fidgeting or posing, but simply existing. The way she tucked a stray lock behind her ear with an economy of motion, practiced and precise. The way her shoulders sat, relaxed but alert, as if she anticipated the world. She was, he decided, a study in contradictions, reserved but impossible to ignore, soft in manner but clearly not someone to underestimate. But none of that was what truly ensnared him. It was her eyes. He had noticed them even before he noticed her dress or the spill of her hair. There was an intensity in them, a subtle force that made you want to meet her gaze and yet look away, as if you were trespassing on something private. The color was a surprise, not the cold black or sharp gray he had come to expect from women bred for power, but warm brown, intelligent, amused, as though she'd already figured him out and was deciding whether to be kind about it. A little. I'm just noticing how you've been watching the happy couple like they're a pair of unicorns. I'm Junji, she said, extending a slender hand towards him. Her grip was firm, confident, not the delicate handshake he'd been expecting. Kim Jackson. I'm the owner of Modu. I know. You know. Half the guests have spent the evening talking about you. That's concerning, especially considering half the wedding guests were Modu employees. Apparently, you're brilliant. I like where this is going. And impossible to work for. There it is. She laughed. The sound hit him unexpectedly. Warm, unfiltered, real. Something in his chest shifted. A tiny movement, barely noticeable, still there. And, Junji continued, you once spent 2 hours arguing over the proper texture of risotto. Kim looked horrified. Who told you that? So it's true. It was important. The chef was wrong. She laughed harder. The texture affects the entire dish. You're unbelievable. Kim crossed his arms. I prefer passionate. I would say stubborn. Same thing. It absolutely is not. Their eyes met. The moment lingered. Their eyes met. I'd imagine it takes passion and grit to run a Michelin star restaurant. She said gently, subsiding. Yeah, he relented. These days, I barely have 2 hours to breathe, let alone argue. Today being an exception. The sounds of jazz and laughter faded slightly around them. Kim found himself noticing details. The tiny dimple that appeared when she smiled. The intelligence behind her ears. the way she seemed completely unimpressed by him, which was surprisingly refreshing. Most people either knew who he was and became nervous, or knew who he was and tried too hard. "You know," she said, tilting her head thoughtfully, "maybe you don't distrust happy endings." "No? No? I think you distrust them happening to you." The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Kim stared at her. She stared right back, no apology, no retreat. Kim took one more glance at his friends for a moment, the happiness they'd fought for. Maybe Tae-hyun was right. Maybe life wasn't only responsibility. Maybe there was room for something else, something unexpected. "Maybe you're right. I'm always open to having my mind changed," Kim said smoothly. As if on cue, the jazz band launched into another lively number. "Dance with me, Junji," he said, extending his hand and giving her the charming smile that always seemed to land well with the ladies. She took his hand, and for the first time in a very long time, Kim stopped thinking about the restaurant, the responsibilities waiting for him tomorrow, and the ghosts he'd carried for years. Instead, he followed a beautiful stranger onto the dance floor beneath the lantern-lit sky and found himself looking forward to whatever happened next.
Thank you for listening to A Taste of Betrayal. Now I want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment from Tae-hyun Kang and Elise Thibodeaux's journey? Was it their first meeting? The tension-filled moments at Modu? Tae-hyun's fierce protectiveness? Elise finding her strength? Or the way they ultimately chose each other despite everything standing in their way? And here's another question. Do you think Tae-hyun and Elise were destined to be together, or did they create their own destiny through the choices they made? I'd also love to know, who was your favorite supporting character? Kim Jackson, Park, Soo-jin, Mrs. Armstrong, or someone else? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every comment, and I love hearing your theories, favorite scenes, and reactions. If you enjoyed this story and want more passionate, emotional, dark romance filled with powerful heroes, strong heroines, suspense, and unforgettable love stories, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new release. Your support helps this channel grow and allows me to continue bringing you more romance stories from around the world. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest risk is opening your heart, and the greatest reward is finding someone worth risking it for. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next story.